All right, folks. Do we have Alex Newman on the line so he can hear what's about to go down? All right. So we've got everybody listening now. I want all my guests to listen. We're gonna be joined by Pete Santelli, Colonel John Mills, and Alex Newman. Before they join us, I want to set the table, and they're listening. They don't know what I'm about to present because I've been working on this now for a little bit and building PowerPoint. So I'm going to go to my PowerPoint, explain to you what I see going on, connect some dots, and then these guys are going to come in and they're going to flesh it out some more and connect some more dots. I hope by now you've alerted all your family and friends because we're going to talk about, well, the Sinaloa drug cartel, China, the CIA, the DEA, our government, all working in concert together in what has basically become a narco drug state, undermining our liberties and freedoms. Are you ready? Let's go to our first slide here on our PowerPoint. We're going to use a lot the Brookings Institute. Here's the first one. This is not an organization that's known for being a conservative organization. I'm going to be showing you information from the right, from the middle, and from the left. The Brookings Institute. Notice the date, February 4th, 2022. The headline, The China Connection in Mexico's Illegal Economies. The article states China is the predominant source of precursor chemicals of Mexican criminal groups, principally the Sinaloa cartel, which then they take this stuff, these chemicals, and they use it to cook fentanyl, methamphetamine from them and smuggle them into the United States of America. Who though? China. China working with Mexican criminal groups. Oh, it gets much worse. As the Deputy Chief of Foreign Operations of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, or DEA, Matthew Donohue, noted in March 2021, Chinese traffickers have virtually ceased to produce fentanyl and focus solely on precursors, quote, with an unlimited and endless supply of precursor chemicals coming from China to Mexico, end quote. This, again, is part of exactly what Kevin Freeman was just talking about with me. The 1999 unrestricted warfare document written by two Chinese communist colonels that we have been talking about on my radio shows and TV shows for years and years and years, along with people like Kevin Freeman and others. They openly said how we're going to collapse America, create chaos in America, drug up Americans, kill Americans. And most Americans have no idea that this is coming from Mexican drug cartels, particularly one, and that our government has paved the way for them, helped them eliminate their competition, and virtually gone into business with them, even providing them with weapons which have been used to kill law enforcement. Oh yeah, you heard about it, Fast and Furious, right? Let's keep going. Chinese money traders and businesses also increasingly, look at that now, launder money for Mexican cartels. Reuters, you guys know Reuters. Again, that's not a right-wing group. Reuters, they put out a detailed report that China has informal money transfer systems that through mirror transactions in Mexico, China, and where? The United States, cleanse money of criminals while enabling Chinese businesses and citizens to evade China's capital controls. But trust me, China knows what's going on. China knows fully what's going on. Here's another one, Business Insider. This is not what I would call a conservative outlet. But what's their headline? Dated January 13th, when? 2014. Here's the headline. Confirmed. The DEA struck a deal with Mexico's most notorious drug cartel. What's it say? An investigation by El Universal found that between the years 2000 and 2012, the U.S. government had an agreement with Mexico's Sinaloa drug cartel that allowed the organization to smuggle billions of dollars of drugs while Sinaloa provided information on rival cartels. Folks, our government knowingly let them smuggle billions of dollars in drugs into the U.S. and allowed them to take out their competition. The article says Sinaloa, led by El Chapo, supplies 80% of the drugs, he's not there now, 80% of the drugs entering the Chicago area and has a presence in cities across the U.S. In a minute, I'll show you the top cities. One of them in the top 5 happens to be Phoenix, Arizona, we talked about. He just said Chicago in this article. We also have Dallas. There have been long allegations that Guzman, considered to be the world's most powerful drug trafficker, coordinates with American authorities. But the El Universal investigation is the first to publish court documents that include corroborating testimony from DEA agent and a Justice Department official. You see, there are some folks inside the DEA, and I think even inside the Justice Department and some of these agencies that are more than happy to talk. They don't like it. There seems to be a war going on between the white hats and the black hats in many of our government agencies, by the way. We have many whistleblowers inside these agencies. We have some that have come out. We've interviewed some of them. Stephen Friend, FBI whistleblower. Kyle Seraphin, FBI whistleblower. Both regular guests here. They've been suspended, had their badge and gun taken, suspended, can't move on to their next job yet. But they say there are a lot more, about 3,500, 3,000 of them, that are watching to see how they get treated. There are some good folks left in our government, and they don't like what they see some of these other guys doing. A real war going on, I think, between the white hats and the black hats in the intelligence arena. Well, this one lawyer claimed to the court that in the late 1990s, Castro, one of them, one that works with them, struck a deal with U.S. agents in which Sinaloa would provide information about rival drug trafficking organizations while the U.S. would dismiss its cases against Sinaloa lawyer and refrain from interfering with Sinaloa drug trafficking activities or actively prosecuting Sinaloa leadership. So, folks, your government's gone into business with one of the most violent drug traffickers, cartels, human traffickers known to man. Quote, the agent stated that this arrangement had been approved by high-ranking officials and federal prosecutors. He also alleged that the Operation Fast and Furious was part of an agreement to finance and arm the cartel in exchange for information used to take down its rivals. A Mexican Foreign Service officer told Stratifer in April 2010 that the U.S. seemed to have sided with the Sinaloa cartel in an attempt to limit the violence in Mexico. Really? I don't buy that. I'll tell you why. I bet you Alex Newman can tell us why we're not buying that either. I think they're in business, the CIA and DA and a few others, because they're profiting from it. There's a lot of dark money for dark ops that Congress will not approve. Here is an article, in fact, by one of our guests who will be with us in just a minute, from 2011. I stumbled on this in my research last night. It was well after midnight. I had to pick up the phone and call him and talk to him. And sure enough, that's how he came to be here tonight. He's a broadcaster with Lindell TV. He's a broadcaster with me over at WVW. Has been for years. He was writing about this in 2011. Report, CIA working with Mexican drug cartels. Alex Newman writes, the Central Intelligence Agency was intimately involved with the federal government's infamous Operation Fast and Furious scheme to send American weapons to Mexican drug cartels while simultaneously working with other agencies, allowing narcotics to be shipped over the border, according to a series of explosive reports. Apparently, the secretive U.S. intelligence agencies also played a key role in creating and using the American government's gun-running program to arm certain criminal organizations. The scheme, which has already been implicated in countless deaths, including the murders of several U.S. and Mexican law enforcement officers, saw thousands of high-powered American guns delivered to multiple cartels. Alex goes on to write, the CIA's motive is clear enough. The U.S. government is afraid the Los Zetas drug cartel will mount a successful coup d'etat against the government of Mexico. So wrote Robert Farrago and Ralph Dixon in the Times report entitled, quote, was CIA behind Operation Fast and Furious, end quote. Hold on, because I'm not sure that's true as far as why our government has sided with them. That's probably just a nice excuse. According to the article, which also cites former CIA officials and even ex-drug DEA agents, boss Phil Jordan, Los Zetas has already prepared to disrupt and possibly even subvert Mexico's 2012 national election. Hold on. Drug cartels, you mean, will actually subvert elections? Huh. Have they done that in America? Are they doing that in America? Ironically, many leaders of the criminal enterprise supposedly threatening the existence of the Mexican government were actually trained, wait for it, trained in the U.S. at the infamous military training center known as School of the Americas. Founded by ex-Mexican Special Forces, the Zetas already control. I got a D in high school Spanish, so maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong. Alex can correct me. He speaks fluent. They've already controlled huge swaths of Mexican territory. They have the organization, arms, and money needed to take over the entire country. There's a real chance that the Zetas cartel could subvert the political process completely as it has throughout the regions it controls. So let me ask you this. Can any of these drug cartels do this here in America? Particularly if they're getting help from the DEA and the CIA. I'm just asking questions. The accused logistical coordinator for the Sinaloa organization, Jose, claimed that he had an agreement with top American officials in exchange for information on rival cartels. The deal supposedly gave him and associates immunity to import multiple multi-ton quantities of drugs across the border. Multi-ton. Indeed, the United States government agents aided the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel. The court filings show this. The court filings show this, not conspiracy. Countless guns via Operation Fast and Furious also flowed to the cartel under the agreement, according to these officials and U.S. officials. Even members of the Zetas have confirmed the allegations, as the New American reported last month. One of the cartel's founders, Jesus, told Mexican police in a taped interrogation released to the public that his organization was getting weapons directly from the U.S. government. New revelations also indicate that American taxpayers were even financing the cartel's arms acquisitions through multiple federal agencies. And available evidence shows that approval for the program reached into the highest levels of the Justice Department and other parts of the Obama administration. But then this new twist in the story adds another, even more troubling dimension to the whole plot. The Washington Times claimed that in an effort to stop Zetas' takeover of Mexico, quote, Uncle Sam has gotten into bed with rival Sinaloa cartel, which has close ties to the Mexican military, end quote, according to the article. The Obama administration was essentially taking sides to help the Calderon regime in power at any cost. But if the U.S. government is also coddling and helping the Zetas, the theory cannot be entirely accurate. As more information continues to surface, the questions are growing in number and importance. So how can you say we're taking out one by helping the other when you're helping both? In the past, the CIA has been implicated in numerous scandals involving drug and weapons trafficking. From Vietnam and Iran to Latin America, the agency has repeatedly been caught importing narcotics and exporting arms for shady and subversive purposes. Here's Fox News, November 12, 2020. Chinese cartels quietly operating in Mexico, aiding U.S. drug crisis, claiming a growing number of American lives annually. For the past 12 years, Chinese criminal organizations have been the backbone to the drug cartels, with chemicals supplied to the cartels and laundering, there's that word again, laundering money here, folks, laundering tens of billions of the cartel profits in North America, that's us, and Europe. Said Rich Higgins. Rich was a friend of mine. He passed away not too long ago. He served on the National Security Council staff for President Trump. He's in some of my documentaries. I've interviewed him. Sadly, he passed away due to an illness. He fought for several months. But Rich Higgins warned about this in his famous memo. According to the Drug Enforcement Agency, or DEA, Mexico and China are the primary source countries for fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances trafficked directly into the United States. Drugs are now the primary source of funding for most terrorist organizations throughout the world, Higgins added, quote, go after the drug profits. Follow the money, not just the drugs. Follow the money. Less money in cartel pockets means what? Less ability to corrupt the rule of law. So here's a question. Are the cartels laundering money here in the U.S.? Are they using it to corrupt the rule of law in America? Are they using it to buy off people? Judges? Are they using it to buy off DAs? Are they using it to buy off politicians? Are they using it to stop the rule of law in America? Because that's what my friend, the late Rich Higgins, was warning about. This money could be used to corrupt the rule of law. And now we find out, thanks to Colonel Mills last night, saying you might want to check into the Sinaloa drug cartel and its connections to China. So I started doing so last night. What did we find? They operate with the full partnership of the Communist Party, the CCP. Let's see. Would the CCP benefit from the collapse of America without firing a shot? That's what unrestricted warfare is about, in part. Would they benefit from corrupting our political system for money that could be used to buy off politicians? You just heard in that first segment Kevin Freeman talking to a communist leader, a PLA leader, People's Liberation Army leader. Yep. We can control about half of your Congress. The other half by Saudi Arabia. China's gangs don't just operate in Latin America, they also corrupt ruling elites. Well, there you go. Isn't that what we're talking about? They corrupt ruling elites. This is a Fox News article. In other words, countries. Is that happening here? This is also a quote. Some of this is coming from Robert Evans Ellis of the U.S. Army War College. Quote, for me in the near term, the most dangerous aspect of China's presence in Latin America and the Caribbean is its distortion of the region's business and politics, as it uses state-sponsored predatory practices to secure its strategic objectives, largely economic there. Is that what they're doing here in America? Buying up business and politicians for their interest? Here's a headline, 2021, Carrier Journal. Chinese nationalists use U.S. banks to launder millions in drug profits for the Sinaloa cartel. You notice I'm quoting all mainstream publications here. Oh, but people want to say that we've been talking about conspiracy. The network is also accused of hiding drug money in casinos. Guatemala, a front company solely used to conceal the money through U.S. and foreign bank accounts, according to court records. Court records. Members of the money laundering network often would drive or fly bulk cash, typically in increments of 300 to 350,000 across America, to avoid depositing too much in the LA area, according to attorneys familiar with the case. Well, here's another article. Top 5 cities that are crowded by Mexican drug cartel. 5, Denver. 4, Phoenix. Have we talked about Arizona this week? Here's an article. This was an op-ed written by former President Harry S. Truman. When they used to have a morning, afternoon, and evening paper, I'm told this came out and it did not go in the next printings that day. Who would have the power and be strong enough to pull an op-ed of a former president of the United States? Maybe the CIA, because in this op-ed, November 22nd, 1963, 1 month after the CIA blew the head off of JFK in broad daylight, a sitting president, Truman releases an op-ed, December 22nd, 1963, and says what? I created the CIA, but it's not what I intended for it to become. What it's become is not what I intended for it to become. And he bemoans the CIA. And he calls for limiting their role. Most people have never read this. There it is. We've gone through it in other broadcasts. We won't go through it tonight, but you can find it. Here is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I had the privilege of interviewing last year. He said, the most courageous newscast in 60 years, speaking about a broadcast by Tucker Carlson, detailing someone that had actually seen the files we are not allowed to see, which his source, who he says saw the files, very intimately aware and has knowledge intimately of what's in the files, that the CIA was involved in the murder of a sitting U.S. president. So don't tell me that this same agency isn't rogue today if they got away with it. Getting away with stuff only empowers people to get away with more stuff. And if you'll murder a sitting president and take part in that in broad daylight, what are they doing behind the scenes? If you'll murder a president in broad daylight, what are they doing in the dark? And here's RFK Jr. saying, the CIA's murder of my uncle was a successful coup d'etat from which our democracy has never recovered. That's exactly right. We live in a virtual deep state, narco state. And aside from Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, it really has never gotten away from them. They control, and oftentimes, I think, actually groom who becomes president. December 10th, 2020. I found this in my research. I've shared it, but I must share it again. A letter by Bill Posey, U.S. Congressman from Florida, December 10th, 2020. Then I'll bring on my guest. He's writing to the Inspector General, Office of the Inspector General, Central Intelligence Agency. He's asking the Inspector General that's supposed to be overseeing the CIA, have you looked into the connections between the voting machine companies and the CIA? He CC'd this to the then Gina is her name, first name, Haspel, CIA director, and at the time, John Ratcliffe, DNI, Director of National Intelligence. And in this letter, he says, my understanding is that origins of Smartmatic began in Venezuela under the regime of Hugo Chavez. The election software was used for the presidential elections that President Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro won. In each of those elections, opposition parties claimed that fraud occurred. In fact, a 2013 U.S. Department of State country report on Venezuela states in the executive summary that, quote, authorities announced that Nicolas Maduro had won the presidency April 14, 2013 by a 1.49% margin amid allegations of pre- and post-election fraud based on a number of irregularities, including government interference, the use of state resources by the ruling party, and wait for it, voter manipulation, end quote. Furthermore, writes the congressman, in a recent sworn affidavit filed with a Georgia election lawsuit, a key witness describes firsthand accounts of how Hugo Chavez asked Smartmatic to design a new election system for Venezuela and, quote, was most insistent that Smartmatic design the system in a way that system could change the vote of each voter without being detected, end quote. I understand that Smartmatic went on to participate in every Venezuelan election since 2018. The witness goes on to state that in the 2013 election, the, quote, Smartmatic electoral management system was used to manipulate and change the results for the person to succeed Hugo Chavez, end quote. The congressman says it's concerning that the creation of such a system could have circumvented the will of the Venezuelan people and contributed to keeping Hugo Chavez, Nicolas Maduro in power while their people suffered greatly. Knowing of the origins of Smartmatic software, was the Central Intelligence Agency aware of its use in Dominion equipment during previous U.S. elections and the 2020 general election? Question mark. If so, did the CIA report the vulnerabilities of this software to other federal agencies or states? Question mark. Has the Inspector General's office conducted a national security investigation on the CIA's connection, if any, with Smartmatic, Seidel, or any other company associated with the election software or hardware? Question mark. Did foreign actors interfere in our election in states that use this questionable software? Question mark. And finally, please provide all relevant documents that deal with the questions above. Do you think he's gotten an answer? His staff tells me no. The citizens of the United States, says the congressman, need assurance that a free and fair election occurred. Without a legitimate investigation by the CIA and Inspector General, the outcome of the election results will be questioned by many Americans. Notice now he doesn't ask questions. He makes a statement. Therefore, I urge you to fully investigate the CIA's role. The CIA's role involving these election companies. Why did he stop asking questions? There's no question mark at the end of that. What does he know? Here's something I also found in my research. 1984, May 9th, 1984, Jesse Helms, senator from North Carolina, who's now, of course, passed away. Helms says CIA rigged election in El Salvador. Yep, Senator Helms, Republican North Carolina, has charged that the CIA, quote, bought the election, end quote, of El Salvador's apparent president-elect Duterte, and the Salvadorian people should, quote, take whatever steps they deem necessary in light of the facts, end quote. Mr. Helms said Mr. Duterte, who is the apparent winner of Sunday's runoff election for president, is a socialist who is, quote, without a mandate to rule or the arguments to produce national unity, end quote. Mr. Helms said the support reportedly given to Mr. Duterte included funds for 400 precinct organizers, a model press operation, technical advice, and funds for the, quote, computer, listen now, computer voter registration system that disenfranchised 20% of the voters the first time around, end quote. So you're telling me our CIA was involved in rigging elections with computers in 1984 to put in a communist? They'll kill a president in broad daylight. You don't think they do that here? And when I mentioned in the middle of October of last year at my national conference with Mike Lindell sitting to my left that I believe, as I warned in the summer of 2020 in programs over and over that included guests with me like Alex Newman, we warned in the summer of 2020 that our Central Intelligence Agencies, our deep state, which is the intel, they would carry out a color revolution as they have done overseas. That's a color revolution Jesse Helms was talking about in 1984. And I said they have practiced it overseas and they're going to do it here. And they did. And when I mentioned this from the platform, the next morning, someone that I've known for 15 years who was with one of the big 3-letter agencies that had just recently retired said to me, when you said last night this was a color revolution practiced overseas and carried out here, I had to laugh. Not because it's wrong, and not because it's funny. I had to laugh because someone is actually saying what is true. You are over the target, and you are over the target more than you know, and you should keep doing it. That's all I'll say. That's all I can say, because I was read into too much, and I don't want to go to jail. But you just keep on that. You're so over the target. You don't know. You don't even can't even believe how over the target you are when you talk about the intelligence agencies practicing a color revolution overseas and then bringing it and carrying out here in the U.S. So here we go, my friends. And don't forget, it was our CIA or some of their people involved in Event 201 in October of 2019 with the World Economic Forum, October 2019, and it included a former deputy director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Well, that's what I've got for you tonight. But first, let me play a video clip. Now, this is a man, in full disclosure, I've met before. He actually worked on behalf with Donald Trump. He also worked with my friend, the late Dr. Peter Pry, who was a CIA analyst, who sat at this desk as I produced his TV show, produced his weekly radio show. Sadly, he passed away in August of last year. And so I have met this former CIA director, James Woolsey. And he worked to help Donald Trump, by the way. And he warned about EMP. So I'm not showing this clip in any way to disparage Mr. James Woolsey, because there's many things Mr. Woolsey has done and warned about that I would be in full agreement, okay? So I want to make sure I gave that context. But let's also not forget the former CIA director was John Brennan, who admitted voting for communist presidential candidate in the 70s and 80s, Gus Hall, and they still let him become the CIA director. Let's also not forget that John F. Kennedy did away with the CIA director, Dulles, for botching the Bay of Pigs, said he would break it into 1,000 pieces and throw it in the wind, and they murdered him in broad daylight. And somehow the CIA director he fired, I think, ended up on the Warren Commission. But listen to what James Woolsey, former CIA director, said about the CIA fooling around in elections. Watch this.
More under their wing.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably, but it was for the good of the system in order to avoid the communists from taking over. For example, in Europe, in 47, 48, 49, the Greeks and the Italians, we
don't do that now, though. We don't mess around other people's elections, Jim.
All right, there you go. Joining me now is Colonel John Mills, Alex Newman, and Pete Santelli. Gentlemen, welcome to the broadcast. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, good to be on your show, Brandon. Good to be with these fine colleagues.
Thank you so much. Colonel, why don't you go first? You're the one that told me last night you might want to research the Sinaloa network drug cartel with China. Woo, boy. I was up till 2 a.m. Thank you for that tip. But what I found an awful lot more that's very concerning, that our government has actually propped them up and helped them.
Yeah, I think we've just assumed away the problem in Mexico for decades. I'll give you some random data points here. Where was Leon? One of the largest Soviet embassies was really Mexico City. And where was Leon Trotsky murdered in 1940? Mexico City. Right before the assassination of JFK, where was Lee Harvey? He was knocking on the door and trying to of the Soviet embassy in Mexico City. and Kostakov was the Russian senior KGB officer who was with the directorate involved in assassinations. That's one of the few things the CIA has not released are the actual transcripts of those calls and contacts. Why in the world was Lee Harvey knocking on the door of the embassy just weeks before? And back then, you got to remember the border was actually far more porous than it is today. And you know, good shooters don't operate alone. Normally, they operate with a spotter. You know, so it's just very random. Just very. Mexico is a mess and has been for decades. We've known about safe houses for foreign intelligence right across the border for decades. Done nothing about it for several reasons: a laziness. Basically, we got to focus on bigger alligators closer to the canoe. Well, Mexico's pretty close to the canoe. You know, so just assuming away the problem from all these footprints of foreign intelligence operations in Mexico, and it's just crazy. One time, several years ago, I was in a when I was in government, I was in a we called them confidence building sessions with the FSB. And it was funny. The conversation I was having with the senior FSB official was, you know, I was talking about periphery and how the Russians love to control their periphery states, and he just said, John, it's no different from the way you control Mexico. And I go, are you kidding me? The way we control Mexico? We don't control Mexico. We don't do anything in Mexico, and Mexico doesn't listen to anything we say anyway. So it's really bad down there, and that is the conduit for fentanyl, which is not just a drug; it's a poison. It's a poison of mass extermination of the American population. Because the Chinese don't want to nuke our country. Because they like our land. They like our farmland. There's a lot of things, so they'd rather just kill off our population. And so they are in total cahoots. And that is what Donald Rumsfeld used to always say is ungoverned space. Mexico is ungoverned space. And, you know, the Sinaloa working with the DEA, that's dirty and nasty work running informants. It's hard to tell after a while who's running who's controlling who. But yeah, their rationale and probably in the legal review would say, well, if we let the Sinaloa dump drugs in America, we're actually in the aggregate diminishing it because we're stopping the other drugs from coming in. That's probably the way the legal review is written on this whole thing. But I don't buy it. Why don't we just stop everything? And if you want to squeeze the Sinaloa to get information on some of the others, fine, squeeze away. Good idea. But don't let them bring drugs into the country. But it's not a very spiritual or good film. But watch the Black Mass with Jimmy Bulger and the way who was running who. The FBI thought they were running Jimmy Bulger. Well, yeah, it was the other way around. Same thing with the Sinaloa and the DEA. And, Mexico is Chinese operating space. And it's not just the Chinese. You got the Venezuelans, you got the Iranians, you got the Russians who've been there ever since their revolution. It's ungoverned space. And what always really annoyed me as I did international negotiations and bilats and multilateral with all the different countries is we just always not just wrote off Mexico, all of Central and South America. And it was always this attitude from State Department, well, you know, they don't like us because of our history of supporting right-wing dictatorships. So we got to go really easy with these folks. And we got to be, we got to really tiptoe around and they don't really like us. And so we're just going to lead from behind, and which is absolutely farcical. We've given away Central and South America to China. So, nothing good is coming out of this. That's ungoverned space. China's all over it. And, I just came back from Phoenix and Arizona, and Phoenix is looking like Los Angeles and San Francisco. It's becoming an absolute mess. And those are all symptoms of drug operations, and especially fentanyl, because you see a lot of zombies on the street. That's zombies on the street usually is an indicator of fentanyl, and fentanyl means China.
Wow. And by the way, folks, just remember, he served on the National Security Council for 2 presidents. Let's bring in someone I quoted from a 2011 article, someone can correct me on all my mispronunciations of those Spanish names, who speaks fluent Spanish among other things. Alex Newman. Alex, what do you make of the presentation tonight?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head, Brandon. It's sad that so few people have picked up on all these connections, but I don't think you can understand what's happening without understanding the U.S. government's involvement with the drug cartels, without understanding the Communist Chinese government's involvement in all this, and of course the U.S. government's relationship with Communist China. One of the things that I've focused a lot on in my work over a period of almost 15 years now is showing how the threat of Communist China was literally made in America, right? Most things are made in China today. The Communist Chinese threat was made in America from the very beginning. I mean, you go back to when they helped the Communist Chinese take over. People like Secretary of State George Marshall, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, all up and down the U.S. government hierarchy, subversives were stabbing our ally Chiang Kai-shek in the back, the leader of Nationalist China, and building up the communists. They continued to do this after the communists took power. Henry Kissinger, of course, was a key player in that. Bush was a key player in that. George Soros has been a key player in that. BlackRock is a key player in that today. And there's one more element to all of this that I think needs to be added into the mix, as if there weren't enough already. And that is the communist takeover of Latin America that has been happening with the backing of Communist China and the backing of Moscow through an organization called the Foro de Sao Paulo, is the name in Portuguese. And the drug connections is direct in this case, right? The Foro de Sao Paulo was actually founded by Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the current wannabe dictator of Brazil, who stole power with a stolen election. Fidel Castro, the mass murdering despot of Cuba, who of course was put into power by these same intelligence agencies, by the U.S. government, by the New York Times, by the State Department, as testified by our own ambassador, Earl Smith. He wrote a whole book about this called The Fourth Floor. If you haven't read that story, I encourage you to do so. It's horrific and tragic. And then the drug cartels were key players here. The FARC in Colombia was one of the founding members of the Foro de Sao Paulo. Now, the Foro de Sao Paulo has taken over virtually the entire Latin American region, very much including Mexico. There's a handful of holdouts like Paraguay and a handful of countries that are not governed by members of the Foro de Sao Paulo, but they are intimately involved in drug trafficking. So you've got the CIA's involvement in drug trafficking. They use this money for, among other things, black operations, things that they want to do that they know Congress won't fund, or that they know they'd get in trouble if Congress looked at the books. And then the Latin American drug cartels, especially the ones in South America and Colombia, have been using the drug money to help rig elections in Latin America, to help prop up their political candidates, very much like the dictatorship in Venezuela uses oil money. And so what you have here, when you take all of this together, what people, the bottom line, I guess, to just really simplify it, there is a massive war. It's already started. It's already taking place. Most Americans just haven't realized it, against the American people, against our Constitution, and against what's left of our nation. And unfortunately, there's a fifth column in Washington, D.C. that's involved in this war on our country, and senior people in the Biden administration are key parts of this. They actually helped Lula just take over Brazil in this fraudulent election. They helped the communists take over in Colombia. They've done it over and over and over again. Barack Obama was out in the open on this. Of course, he started his political career in the living room of a communist terrorist who was working with the communist Cubans. So you have the communist Chinese, the Russians, the fifth column in Washington, D.C., the drug cartels, all working to destroy what's left of our country. And your average American remains clueless to this reality. We won't survive for much longer as a nation unless people snap out of it and get at least some basic understanding of the things that you broke down today, Brandon.
And what about the money, the dark money? You know, the media tried to give the government, I guess, a pass, the DA a pass. So, well, they're just trying to stop this one group that's really, really bad. Wait a minute. It sounds like from your article, they're helping both sides. So I'm not buying that, number one. Number two, what about all the dark money the government, the CIA, is getting to run their black ops off the books away from Congress?
Yeah, I think one of the things that they do with all that black money is overthrow foreign governments. They run operations targeting people, all the things that they're not allowed to do legally, all the things that Congress would freak out if they learned about. That's what they do with this drug money. Now, a lot of people out there are probably thinking, this sounds a little bit implausible. The CIA is trafficking drugs. This is not a new story. It's only new to most Americans. Gary Webb.
Tell them about good old Barry Seal. Till they were done with him, and I guess Bush or somebody had his brains blown out, right?
Yep, and that's what happens regularly to these people. Most of Joseph Stalin's minions were executed in purges. But this story has been around for a long time. Gary Webb, who really first broke the CIA's drug trafficking.
And where is Gary Webb today?
He committed suicide with 2 bullets in his head, if you believe the
Really?
fake
He
media.
shot himself twice in the head. Wow.
That's what we're expected to believe.
Kind of like the
Yep.
guy in Arkansas they just found hanging from a tree and shot in the chest with a shotgun, and they can't find the shotgun. Huh.
Yep. And I think they do this on purpose, Brandon. I think they want everybody who's paying attention to think, oh, I guess that's what happens when you expose the CIA's
Kind of
drug
like instead of
trafficking
ripping your
operation.
tongue out through the bottom of your, your neck, where they send a message. What is that called? A necktie or something for the mob. So this
Yep.
is how the deep state sends a message to everybody.
Yep. And I think that's what's happening here. And, they've been caught before. The head of the DEA, actually, Bonner, actually went on national television and said in public on national TV he caught the CIA importing a metric ton of cocaine into the United States on an airplane in cooperation with the National Guard in Venezuela. And how many people do you suppose went to jail for that? And I can tell you the answer is 0. And that's what happens. So we need to understand that all of this is connected, right? Yeah, there's local corruption. Yeah, there are people who are just doing this to make money, but it's much bigger than making money. This is about a war on America, a war on the values that America is based on. And again, if we don't wake up soon, they're going to be able to succeed here.
Peter Santelli, Colonel Mills did a study, and he believes that Communist China, the CCP, put probably close to or over $100 million into groups to carry out the revolution they were attempting with burning and looting in 2020. Some of these groups are known Maoist front groups. Trevor Loudon's documented that. Colonel Mills has said on our program twice that he kind of put pen to paper and figures they've spent about $100 million doing that. Wonder where all that money comes from. Could it come from some of this Sinaloa drug cartel working with China, laundering the money, as we heard from multiple secular mainstream sources, how they launder money in North America and the U.S.? Could that also be used not only for fomenting revolution in the streets of America and paying people off with cash and using different websites and apps? Hey, come here and be a paid professional protester and get $250 for the night. These people have no clue why they're showing up. They were paid to show up, and they've told people, oh, I was just paid to show up. Where is that cash coming from? Number one, could it be from this kind of thing? And number two, could it further be used to pay people to go around ballot harvesting? Because some of these secular reports we just heard, they're using their influence to buy up companies and politicians in other countries. Why not here?
Moving money internationally and drugs, couple of things we can kind of refresh our memory. Speaking of Barry Seal, let's talk about Barry Soetoro, who got us out of Iraq and, of course, took us into Afghanistan. And early on, I spoke with
By the way, you need to remind some of the audience who you just talked about, because they don't know him by that name.
Barack Obama himself, when we were planted in Afghanistan. At the time, it was $100 million plus early on. But the heroin traffic, opium. I spoke early on with a Marine Corps lieutenant. I was actually on vacation, and we became really good friends. But he shared with me that he was in charge as a counter narcotics officer. He was in charge of protecting pallets of the opium, the heroin that was being pulled out of Afghanistan on behalf of the CIA, put on transport aircraft, and of course destined for the United States of America. That Barry Soetoro, of course, is Barack Obama, one of the biggest drug traffickers, of course. And another little known thing is that we have somebody that's been supported by the Clinton administration. His name is Fethullah Gulen. He's the largest drug trafficker supporting terrorism worldwide, and he resides in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. This is all supported, of course, this black money that flows through drug trafficking, through gun running. Of course, we learned about it with Benghazi. And of course, Mark Turry out of Phoenix, Arizona, an underling of John McCain, running guns around the world in Operation Fast and Furious under Barack Obama. They make a lot of money in selling drugs. They make a lot of money in selling guns. And these are not conspiracy theories, by the way. And they also make a lot of money. There's a lot at stake because a little known fact that John Brennan himself, when he was assistant CIA chief in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, just so happened to override his assistant chief and stamped the student visas of 5 of the 9/11 hijackers, allowing them to come into the United States of America. Now, one more thing. The entire crafted scenario, if you piece it together, Osama bin Laden, of course, was on the CIA payroll. I have a friend of mine who I was in the Marine Corps with and haven't spoken to him ever since he revealed this. I had 2 CIA and 3 FBI whistleblowers who hadn't been brought back to the United States and been debriefed, but he gave me whistleblower testimony on audio recording, was provided to the Benghazi Select Committee, that he delivered a dialysis machine to Osama bin Laden with a doctor. Osama bin Laden was on the payroll. This is prior to 9/11. In 1999, he did this. And he was working for the Central Intelligence Agency. My friend was. So there's a lot of white hats in the system that have wanted to come forward with a lot of this information. It's amazing to me how they're able to keep a lid on it. I think at this point in time, we see where things are going. People are keeping compartmentalized. What happened leading up to the 2020 election and then into January 6th, there were people on the ground. Where are they getting their money in addition to the trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking, and gun running around the world? Ukraine has been their piggy bank since they overthrew the Ukraine in 2013, 2014, led by none other than Victoria Nuland, whose husband was Robert Kagan, a fellow at the Brookings Institute. This is important. Why? The Brookings Institute. I think you brought up an article. There is a set of individuals, of course, under the PNAC, Robert Kagan with PNAC, Victoria Nuland's husband, as a member of the Brookings Institute, and somebody who wrote the book on the color revolution. He also led the impeachment hearings as a staff member under Nancy Pelosi that allowed him to do the questioning. This is the same man that wrote the manual on the Transition Integrity Project. He wrote the manual on conducting overthrows of regimes worldwide and especially employing technology to do that. The CIA has been the culprit in just about every major incident around the world for overthrowing governments. Now they're employing their services here on the United States of America in this war, this 5th generation war against the American people.
Colonel Mills, Mike Lindell was warning that China interfered in our elections. We, I think, had a letter from then Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, warning about that fact, that he was concerned about that before the election. Mike Lindell has been very outspoken about cyber attacks from China. He believes and has shown what he says, are some really hard, clear evidence of such. A lot of people wanted to scoff at that. Really? Well, then why did the Director of National Intelligence warn about that before the election if it wasn't a possibility? And why did the man who said we had the cleanest election when he was at CISA go on after he left that post? Chris, what was his name?
Krebs.
Chris Krebs went on to speak with Adam Schiff on a morning show and said, oh, yeah, China can hack us all the way down to the local election. Wait a minute. Weren't you the one a few weeks ago saying it was the cleanest election of all time? Now you're warning about China hacking us down to the local election? I mean, which one is it? How much do you think China has been involved in a multi-pronged approach? Cyber hacking on elections, using money like through these activities of theirs in the U.S., and using that money for ballot harvesting and other things. In other words, is it probable that China has been working on a multi-pronged approach to bring down America and flip our elections?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is unrestricted warfare from 1999, and this is their goal to take down America. Now, Ratcliffe's letter, I think, was fantastic, and I've used that in my federal, I cited this in the sworn federal testimony I've given on these topics, is Ratcliffe cited the CIA director during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The groupthink among the analysts was Russia would never put weapons in Cuba. So the CIA director at the time had to fight the tyranny of the practitioner and the tyranny of the groupthink of Russia will never put weapons in Cuba. And guess what? They were wrong. It's the same thing again. It's always a groupthink. If I spent a career in national security, there's always, I call it the tyranny of the narrative. And everybody's going to all these meetings talking about all these things. You know, you're balancing so many things on your plate. There's always just, no matter what happens in the meeting, you just parrot back the accepted narrative, regardless of whether it's been tested, whether it's been updated, whether it's been challenged, whether rigor has been given to it. You just say, hey, that's what everybody says about this topic, and a discussion, next issue. And again, Ratcliffe's brilliant citation of the CIA director fighting the CIA on the opinion that there was no missiles, no Russian missiles in Cuba. We actually we actually lost several Air Force flyers and CIA pilots to fly over the hostile airspace and confirm that yes, there were Russian missiles, despite everybody, all the Harvard-trained experts saying, "No way, boss, not true. That's you're some early version of Donald J. Trump and MAGA. There's nothing to worry about in Cuba." No, it was right. The Russians were putting missiles. That's what we have to deal with here with China, because they all say, yeah, no, don't have to worry about China. And most of them are just lazy. A lot of the intel analysts are just lazy. Remember, the intel analysts are paid on a quota system. I mean, they're not necessarily paid, but that's their annual bonus. It's all about how many reports did you do? And so that's all the intel analysts care about. And they're not going to, they're just going to regurgitate unclassified information into top secret talking points here. But they're not concerned about rigor and revisiting the accepted narrative. And that's what the problem is I call, again, the tyranny of the accepted narrative on whichever problem you're talking about. And oftentimes it's proven to be wrong. And
let me show you this. Let me show you this. Is this the letter from Ratcliffe that you're talking about? Show that on the screen for them, guys. This is Ratcliffe's letter, the director of national intelligence, saying, "Hey, look, China fooled around in our elections." That's the letter you're referring to, right, Colonel?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Is that what is it, November, December, 2020?
Yep.
Yeah. And if you go down, that's where he cites a very, very astute historical scenario in Cuba. So we're spending $80 billion a year on the we release the unclassified number at the end of the year. It's roughly $80 billion plus or minus some. And I had to do a lot of work with the IC intelligence community budget numbers. The whole concept of keeping money off book. And a lot of these operations, they are keeping stuff off book, and there's not a robust enough IG to go after these off book financial holdings. You just never enter them on book. Just if you're getting it out of a drug operation, you just never enter them into the book. Keep them off book. And, that's where you start, passing money through Panama or Cyprus or Malta or the Ukraine.
And then you just turn around and bring it home. And you use it here. I see you shaking your head, Alex. I mean, you have studied how corrupt the CIA is. It was corrupted almost from the very beginning, was it not? Who was the first director of the CIA?
Even before the CIA, there was the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, and that was corrupt way back then. They had a number of different people who were key players there, and there's always been decent people in the intelligence community. I mean, Captain John Birch was actually affiliated with OSS in China, who was, of course, murdered by the communists. But one of the really interesting things I came across about the OSS, now this is before the CIA was even created, Dick Novak, and I don't recommend people listen to Dick Novak. He's not exactly a luminary exposing the truth, but he put a column in the Washington Compost, and he said that the OSS had been infiltrated by communists. Well, the head of the OSS Society, his name was Charles Pink. He actually wrote a letter to the editor of the Washington Compost, and he corrected Dick Novak. He said, nope, we were not infiltrated by communists during the war. We actually hired them. So you've had a problem where the intelligence agencies in this country have been infiltrated from top to bottom with communists from the very, very beginning. The Venona documents showed hundreds and hundreds of people at the highest levels across foreign policy and intelligence circles in the U.S. government were actually agents of the Soviet Union. So this is not a new problem. You pointed to John Brennan earlier. He's a perfect example of the problem we're talking about. This is a guy who admitted just a couple years after it happened that he voted for Gus Hall, the Communist Party USA candidate in the 1978 presidential election. Not only did he admit that, not only was he given a security clearance despite that, he was promoted up through the ranks so quickly that he ended up running the CIA. And he's far from the only one. Leon Panetta is another perfect example. This is a guy who was affiliated with the Marxist Institute for Policy Studies, basically a Soviet front group in Washington, D.C., for decades. And somehow he ends up running the CIA and running the Department of Defense. Over and over and over again, you find these individuals at the highest levels of government. And Obama himself is a really good example of that. This is a guy who started his political career in the living room of a known communist terrorist, Bill Ayers, who had been working with the communist Cubans. So we have had this problem in our intelligence community from the very beginning. It has only gotten worse since then. And, you know, if you look at the fruit also, right, don't just look at the players. Look at the fruit. What has the CIA done for this country? Under the guise of keeping us safe from radical Islam, they have massively stirred up radical Islam. Under the guise of keeping us safe from communism, they have helped nation after nation fall to the communists. And you can look at just about any place. South Africa is a really, really good example of that. Cuba is also a very good example of that. China is a good example of that. If you go back even before the CIA and the OSS, if you go all the way back to the Bolshevik Revolution, what you'll find, and again, this is the pattern every single time, is very powerful people in the United States, including some of the biggest bankers on Wall Street, were involved in financing the Bolshevik Revolution. So I would say this problem that we're dealing with really has its nucleus in the United States, in London, and in some of the other European capitals. Yes, Communist China is an existential threat to the United States, but it is an existential threat to the United States because of the aid and comfort provided by generation after generation of deep state operatives in our intelligence community, in our State Department, in our White House, and in our business community.
Didn't we have one guy that got up in the intelligence arena and we finally found out he was a communist and put him on trial? Who was that? I can't remember his name.
I wonder if you're thinking of Alger Hiss.
Yes.
He was a senior State Department guy. Yeah, they said he was actually very, very close to FDR. He helped negotiate this atrocity at Yalta. Before that, he had been running the Carnegie Institute. Then they sent him to go represent us when they were creating the United Abominations, better known as the UN. They first made him the chairman of the conference that wrote the UN Charter. Then they made him the first Secretary General of the UN. And then, one of the things that I really admire Richard Nixon for, Richard Nixon, as a prosecutor, took this guy to court, prosecuted him, and had him thrown in federal prison because he was working for Joseph Stalin as a spy. And these people are everywhere at the highest levels. Harry Dexter White is another really good example. And if you really want to find kind of the headquarters of this disgusting operation in the United States, and it's a global operation, but it has a headquarters here in the United States, you'll find it in New York City. It's called the Council on Foreign Relations. They publish their membership online. Not every one of those people is a dangerous subversive, but odds are if they're on that list, they should be treated as suspect at the very least, unless and until they officially repent and expose what has happened there. And many good Americans have exposed this. People like Admiral Chester Ward, who spent 16 years in the CFR. You wonder where they get these people, right? Where do Biden, where does Obama, where do the Bushes, where do they get these clowns that so consistently are betraying our country and so consistently helping our enemies? The answer is the Rolodex of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Absolutely. All right, you guys hold right there. I got to do a little plug, come right back to you guys for closing comments. So hold right there. Folks, where else are you going to get this kind of information and distinguished panel? One of the few outlets would even cover this. If you appreciate what we're doing, we need your support. It's so expensive to do television and push out free television. Many people put everything behind a paywall. If you don't pay, you don't see it. But we don't do that. We need your support. Here's a few quick ways before we get closing comments from all of these guys. I also want to ask Alex about the CIA's involvement with killing of President Kennedy. One way you can support us is go to wvwtvstore.com. Take a look right here, wvwtvstore.com. If you want to see everything we have to offer, make sure you click up at the top, emergency food supplies, because some of you are like, I don't see everything. Click emergency food supplies, then all emergency food supplies. And when you do that, it will bring you, all emergency food supplies. Here we go. It will bring you to that page with all of those supplies. We have Ready Hour Ultimate Breakfast, Mega Protein with real meat, Ready Hour Fruit and Veggie, gluten-free, 1 year, 4 week, 2 year, 6 month, however you want to do it. We are extending free freight February. Many of you are begging us to because you want to think about what you want to get and you need to budget for it. So many of you said, look, I need a budget for this. I'm waiting to get paid after the first of the month. Can you extend it? Okay, we're going to extend this through March, okay? Free freight February is going into March. For some of you, that's going to save hundreds of dollars. I know you can buy it elsewhere. Buy it from us. It's a big part of our general operating budget. We were customers in 2013. We didn't become distributors to 2016. So, folks, we believe in this. I had 6 months supply. Now I have over 2 years. I've added in enough for not only family and friends, the guys in the control room, but also to barter with, should it come to that. I pray it doesn't. I hope you have plenty. You can order it at wvwtvstore.com. If you would like to call and have someone answer your questions, Libby is standing by. She spent 13 hours on the phone Monday, 12 hours yesterday. I don't know how many hours today. She's still taking calls. We are seeing historic records for sales, which means the American people are waking up and they realize your government, they're not for you, folks. They are against you. You ought to know that by now from just tonight's show. So when we go to World War III and we have the new way of warfare, that is the first method, not nuclear war. The new way of warfare would come first. Cyber hacking and EMP. The government's not going to help you. Just know that. So you better help yourself. Here's your chance to do so. You can go to wvwtvstore.com, order and get free shipping. Or you can call 901-468-9357, 901-468-9357. The other way you can help support us is by going to mypillow.com, mypillow.com. Right here we have the brand new MyPillow 2.0 with cooling technology that was not available when Mike invented the original MyPillow. You get a buy one, get one free deal right now. This comes in, by the way, the queen and the king set or option, and then also use the fitting chart to get what's best for you. MyPillow.com. Use the promo code B66. If you do, we get credit. If you don't want to support this show, if you don't want this show to continue, if you don't appreciate information like this, then don't use our code. But if you do, and I know you do, please use the code B66. If you don't use that code, we don't get credit. So use that code for savings, B66. Sheets, towels, blankets, pet beds, slippers, sandals, mattresses, mattress toppers, robes, and much more. MyPillow.com, promo code B66. Let's go to our team tonight, our distinguished panel. Quickly, I want to give their website. The first is Colonel John Mills, formerly on the National Security staff for 2 presidents. He was at the DOD. He's retired Army, and he has written a book called And the Nation Will Follow. You can get a copy at thenationwillfollow.com, thenationwillfollow.com. Colonel Mills, give us your closing thoughts tonight on what we've been presenting.
Well, yeah, it's corruption throughout our government. There are white hats and those who mean well, but this is why the swamp didn't like Donald J. Trump. It's because he actually, for once, even as much as I liked President Reagan, it was the only person was threatening and actually turning over the money changers' tables in the swamp was Donald J. Trump. And they don't like that. And again, there's this established narrative. It's a good gig to get one of these government jobs, and people don't, they don't want anybody coming in and disrupting it. But the problem with that is that the American government is supposed to work for the American people. It's not the other way around. But again, like in these NSC meetings, many times people would say snide things, and this is during the Bush years or the Obama years. Hey, the American people are too stupid, and we need to tell them what to do. So no, we need to flip and inverse this whole thing. It's going to be a 50-year slog to retake our country, but we gotta start now.
Kevin Freeman said tonight when he would brief people in the Pentagon, admirals and generals were telling him, "Oh no, China's our friend. China's our friend." I mean, holy cow, Colonel, when guys like me and Alex that don't have a military background like you and Pete, but when we are, a bunch of nerds here that read books and write articles and papers, when we figure out and know more than the admirals and generals at the Pentagon, we're in big trouble.
Yeah, most of them are just trying to survive and not being relieved of command. They don't want to appear on the front of Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marine Corps, now Space Force Times. You never want to appear on the front of those journals. That usually means you've been relieved of command. They're just trying to survive, so they don't want to get involved in this stuff. And back then, hey, China, come on, we're focused on radical Islam. This China thing, it's a nuisance. It's a distraction. Don't even worry about it. Well, now we know better.
Pete Santelli, what are your thoughts as you've been sitting here listening to the conversation since you last spoke?
We're in the final phase of this long march through the institutions. And, I'm a Cold War veteran. So when the Soviet Union finally collapsed, if you read and listen to Gorbachev, Perestroika, basically took the communist Soviet Union, communism, globally franchised it. But that wasn't the beginning of it. If you go to the 1963 record in Congress, 45 goals were read into the congressional record. Former FBI special agent Cleon Skousen published a book, The Naked Communist. This has been a long time in the making. And the only disappointing thing is they have us so conditioned through the technocracy to look for the dopamine hit. We want a quick fix. Colonel Mills just mentioned it's going to take us a while to unpack this thing. But you'll notice China is very, very patient. They've been on a 50-year plan. The Soviets, the reading of the Communist Manifesto into the congressional record in 1963, I suggest everybody go read that. And they have basically sought out decades ago to do exactly what they're doing right now. And what we're watching is the final phases of this extraction of all of our wealth, our sovereignty, because our constitutional republic is so powerful and so beautiful. It was the last step as the CIA practiced coups d'etats around the world, overthrowing communist regimes. They became very skilled. And now they've applied their skills towards taking us down on behalf of the globalists.
Pete,
we're that speed bump.
Pete, how can people hear your show? What's your website?
Pete Santilli .mobi is the best way to find my links. But my last thing that I was going to say is that we're basically in this final phase of the communist long-term plan. That's what we're suffering through. And China's, of course.
You're on frankspeech.com every morning at 8 a.m.
Every morning, 8
a.m. Central.
Eastern time.
Alex, your website is?
LibertySentinel.org is my personal website. Then I'm senior editor at the New American magazine at thenewamerican.com.
And you're on every day on Lindell TV. What time?
3:30 Central, 4:30 Eastern on Lindell 2, and then it rebroadcasts, I believe, at night, and maybe is it 2 Central on Lindell 1, something like that. And then people can find it in the archives, frankspeech.com.
Yeah, it's on demand. All right, so Venota Project was running from 1943 to 1980. I don't think FDR knew that program was running. I think they even kept it secret from him because they were concerned about communists close to him, and they found one, didn't they?
They found tons. There were numerous communists at the highest levels close to him. If you look at that infamous picture of FDR negotiating with Stalin at Yalta, you'll see right next to FDR is standing Alger Hiss, the man that we were just talking about earlier. That's how high the communists penetrated. And honestly, if you look at the actions of people like FDR, if you look at the actions of people like Eisenhower, there are some real big question marks. Why did they feel the need to deport 2 million Soviet refugees, many of whom had fought alongside us against the Nazis, back to certain death and brutal torture at the hands of Joseph Stalin? Why did they hand Cuba over to the communists? Why did they hand Eastern Europe over to the communists? Why did they hand China over to the communists? As our great Secretary of War, James Forrestal, put it, if these people in our State Department were merely stupid, occasionally they would make a mistake in our favor.
Well,
and yet they never do.
I have a quote from one of them saying if it wasn't for the guys at the State Department, Castro could have never taken Cuba.
There's no question about it. The U.S. ambassador to Havana, Earl Smith, testified under oath in the Senate. Castro's in power because the U.S. government put him there. The lying New York Slimes called him the George Washington of Latin America. They said he was an anti-communist freedom fighter. The State Department insisted that we send them weapons. They insisted that Fulgencio Batista was a fascist dictator and that he couldn't have any support, that we had to throw him under the bus. The reason tens of thousands of Cubans were murdered by the government, the reason millions of Cubans had to flee for their lives, was a direct result of U.S. government policy. The same thing is now happening to the rest of Latin America, and where next?
Pull that down a little bit so it doesn't interrupt your voice. So the CIA is largely one of the many states that has been flipped against the American people by and large. Is that what you're saying, Alex?
No question about it. They need to be investigated and, I believe, dismantled.
And that Congressman Bill Posey seems to be onto something when he talks about the CIA and their connection to the voting machines, Bill Posey. And then you figured the fact they murdered a president in broad daylight in '63. I guess that pretty much emboldened them, did it not?
It did.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you to all of you for being with us.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Brandon.
The Venona Project ran from 1943 to 1980, my friends. Many people then were saying that this talk of communism is crazy. Crazy talk, I tell you. And of course, today we find out it's all true once they declassified, not all, but most of those documents from the Venona Project. Well, we better learn from history or we're going to see it repeated. The American people need to wake up. The question is, why is mainstream media not doing shows like this? Why is Fox News not do a full hour and a half, an hour 40, what was it, hour 15 minutes like we just did since Kevin Freeman? Why doesn't Fox do that? How many of our members of Congress know what we just laid out tonight? Let's not forget, we're to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. If we don't know it, how can we hold our elected officials accountable to clean this up? And if we don't realize that our elections are being stolen by our own government and government agencies, how can we then stop it? No wonder Mike Lindell wants to go back to paper only. Do you want the government, deep state, to keep hijacking elections with their enemies, foreign and domestic? Well, we've laid out a lot for you tonight. You probably didn't know that your own CIA, DEA, government was in cahoots with a drug cartel working as partners with communist China. And that your own government has aided them, helped them take out their competition, and then armed them with weapons which have been used to kill Americans and law enforcement. I've said it before, I'm patriotic. I love my country. What's running the central government today is not what America is about. It's not anti-American to point it out or to criticize it or to alert the American people about it. That's patriotic, what we did tonight. I'm Brennan House. Thanks for watching. Take care.